Hello and welcome to Audiobooks, yeah, the world of books. Today I'm reading Ruskin Bond's The Beast Tamer, Part 3. The chapter name is Mustela of the Lone Hand. It was in the very heart of the ancient wood, the forest primeval of the north, gloomy with the dark green crowded ranks of fir and spruce and hemlock, and tangled with the huge windfalls of countless storm torn winters. But now, at high noon of the glowing northern summer, the gloom was pierced to its depths with shafts of radiant sun. The barred and checkered transparent brown shadows hummed with dancing flies. The warm air was alive with the small, thin notes of chickadee and nut thatch, varied now and then by the impertinent scolding of the Canada jay, and the drowsing treetops steamed up an incense of balsamy fragrance in the heat. The ancient wilderness dreamed, stretched itself all open to the sun, and seemed to sigh with immeasurable content. High up in the great trunk of a half dead forest giant was a round hole, the entrance to which had been the nest of a pair of big, red headed, golden winged woodpeckers, or yellow hammers. The big woodpeckers had long since been dispossessed, the female probably caught and devoured, with her eggs upon the nest. The dispossessor and present tenant was Mustela. Framed in the blackness of the round hole was a sharp, muzzled, triangular golden brown face with high pointed ears, looking out upon the world below with keen eyes in which a savage wilderness and an alert curiosity were incongruously mingled. Nothing that went upon the dim ground far below, among the tangled trunks and windfalls, or in the sun drenched treetops, escaped that restless and piercing gaze. But Mustela had fed well and felt lazy, and this hour of noon was not his hunting hour. So the most unsuspecting red squirrel gathering cones in a neighboring pine was insufficient to lure him from his rest, and the plumpest hare, waving its long, suspicious ears down among the ground shadows, only made him lick his thin lips and think what he would do later on in the afternoon when he felt like it. Presently, however, a figure came into view at sight of which Mustella's expression changed. His thin black lips wrinkled back in a soundless snarl, displaying the full length of his long, snow white, deadly sharp canines, and a red spark of hate smoldered in his bright eyes. But no less than his hate was his curiosity, a curiosity which is the most dangerous weakness of all Mustella's tribe. Mustella's pointed head stretched itself clear of the hole in order to get a better look at the man who was passing below his tree. A man was a rare sight in that remote and inaccessible section of the northern wilderness. This particular man, a woodsman, a timber cruiser, seeking out new and profitable areas for the work of the lumbermen, wore a flaming red and orange handkerchief loosely knotted about his brawny neck, and carried over his shoulder an axe, whose bright blade flashed sharply whenever a ray of sunlight struck it. It was this flashing axe and the blazing color of the scarlet and orange kerchief that excited Stella's curiosity, so excited it indeed that he came clean out of the hole and circled the great trunk, clinging close and wide legged like a squirrel in order to keep the woodsman in view as he passed by. Engrossed though he was in the interesting figure of the man, Mustella's vigilance was still unsleeping. His amazingly quick ears at this moment caught a hushed hissing of wings in the air above his head. He did not stop to look up and investigate. Like a streak of ruddy light, he flashed around the trunk and whisked back into his hole. And just as he vanished, a magnificent, long winged goshawk, the king of all falcons, swooping down from the blue, struck savagely with his clutching talons at the edges of the hole. The quickness of Mastella was miraculous. Moreover, he was not content with escape. He wanted vengeance. Even in his dive, lightning dive into his refuge, he had managed to turn about, doubling on himself like an eel. And now, as those terrible talons gripped and clung for half a second to the edge of the hole, he snapped his teeth securely into the last joint of the longest talon and dragged it an inch or two in. With a yelp of fury and surprise, the great falcon strove to lift himself into the air, pounding madly with his splendid wings and twisting himself about, and thrusting mightily with his free foot against the side of the hole. But he found himself held fast, as in a trap. Sieging back with all his weight, Mustela braced himself securely with all 4 feet and hung on, his whipcord sinews set like steel. He knew that if he let for an instant to secure a better mouthful, his enemy would escape. So he just worried and chewed at the joint, satisfied with the punishment he was inflicting. Meanwhile, the woodsman, his attention drawn by that one sudden yelp of the falcon and by the prolonged and violent buffeting of wings, had turned back to see what was going on. Pausing at the foot of Mistella's tree, he peered upwards with narrowed eyes. A slow smile wrinkled his weather-beaten face. He did not like hawks. For a moment or two he stood wondering what it was in the hole that could hold so powerful a bird. Whatever it was, he stood for it. Being a dead shot with a revolver, he seldom troubled to carry a rifle in his cruisings. Drawing his long barreled Smith and Wesson from his belt, he took careful aim and fired. At the sound of the shot, the thing in the hole was startled and let go, and the great bird, turning once over slowly in the air, dropped to his feet with a feathery thud, its talons still contracting shudderingly. The woodsman glanced lip, and there, framed in the dark of the hole, was the little yellow face of Mustela, insatiably curious, snarling down on him viciously. Gee, muttered the woodsman. I might have knowed it. It was one of them. Pesky martins. Nobody else o' that size. To have the gal to tackle a duck hawk. Now the fur of Mustela, the pine marten or American sable, is a fur of price. But the woodsman, subject, like most of his kind, to unexpected attacks of sentiment and imagination, felt that to shoot the defiant little fighter would be like an act of treachery to an ally. You're a pretty fighter, Sonny, said he, with a whimsical grin. And ye may keep that yellow pelto yon, for all o me. Then he picked up the dead falcon, tied its claws together, slung it upon his axe, and strode off through the trees. He wanted to keep those splendid wings as a present for his girl in at the settlements. Highly satisfied with his victory over the mighty falcon, for which he took the full credit to himself, Mustela now retired to the bottom of his comfortable, moss lined nest and curled himself up to sleep away the heat of the day. As the heat grew sultrier and drowsier through the still hours of early afternoon, there fell upon the forest a heavy silence, deepened rather than broken by the faint hum of the heat loving flies and the spicy scents of pine and spruce and tamarack steamed forth richly upon the moveless air. When the shadows of the trunks began to lengthen, Mistela woke up, and he woke up hungry. Slipping out of his hole, he ran a little way down the trunk and then leapt, lightly and nimbly as a squirrel, into the branches of a big hemlock which grew close to his own tree. Here, in a crotch from which he commanded a good view beneath the foliage, he halted and stood motionless, peering about him for some sign of a likely quarry. Poised thus, tense, erect, and vigilant, Miss Stella was a picture of beauty, swift and fierce. In color, he was of a rich golden brown, with a patch of brilliant yellow covering throat and chest. His tail was long and bushy to serve him as a balance in his long squirrel like leaps from tree to tree. His pointed ears were large and alert to catch all the faint, elusive forest sounds. In length, being a specially fine specimen of his kind, he was perhaps a couple of inches over 2 feet. His body had all the lithe grace of a weasel, with something of the strength of his great cousin and most dreaded foe, the fisher. For a time nothing stirred. Then from a distance came, faint but shrill, the chirr of a red squirrel. Mistella's discriminating ear located the sound at once. All energy on the instant, he darted towards it, springing from branch to branch with amazing speed and noiselessness. The squirrel, noisy and imprudent after the manner of his tribe, was chattering fussily and bouncing about on his branch, excited over something best known to himself, when a darting gold brown shape of doom landed upon the other end of the branch, not half a dozen feet from him. With a screech of warning and terror, he bounded into the air, alighted on the trunk, and raced up to it, with Mistela close upon his heels. Swift as he was, and everyone who had seen a red squirrel in a hurry knows how he can move. Mistela was swifter, and in about 5 seconds, the little character's fate would have been sealed. But he knew what he was about. This was his own tree. Had it been otherwise, he would have sprung into another and directed his desperate flight over the slenderest branches, where his enemy's greater weight would be a hindrance. As it was, he managed to gain his hole just in time, and all that Mustela got was a little mouthful of fur from the tip of that vanishing red tail. Very angry and disappointed, and hissing like a cat, Mustela jammed his savage face into the hole. He could see the squirrel crouched with pounding heart and panic stricken eyes, a few inches below him, just out of his reach. The hole was too small to admit his head. In a rage, he tore at the edges with his powerful claws, but the wood was too hard for him to make any impression on it, and after half a minute of futile scratching, he gave up in disgust and raced off down the tree. A moment later, the squirrel poked his head out and shrieked, an effectual warning to every creature within earshot. With that loud alarm shrilling in his ears, Mustela knew there would be no success. There would be no successful hunting for him till he could put himself beyond the range of it. He raced on, therefore, abashed by his failure, till the taunting sound faded in the distance. Then his bushy brown brush went up in the air again, and his wonted look of insolent self confidence returned. As it did not seem to be his lucky day for squirrels, he descended to earth and began quartering the ground for the fresh trail of a rabbit. In that section of the forest where Mistela now found himself, the dark and scented jungle of spruce and balsam fir was broken by thickets of stony barren, clothed unevenly by thickets of stunted white birch and silver leaved quaking aspen, and wild sumach with its massive tuft of acrid, dark crimson bloom. Here the rabbit trails were abundant, and Mistela was not long in finding one fresh enough to offer him the prospect of a speedy kill. Swiftly and silently, nose to earth, he set himself to follow its intricate and apparently aimless windings, sure that he would come upon a rabbit at the end of it. As it chanced, however, he never came to the end of that particular trail, or set his teeth in the throat of that particular rabbit. In gliding past a bushy young fir tree, he happened to glance beneath it, and marked another of his tribe, tearing the feathers from a new slain grouse. The stranger was smaller and slighter than himself, a young female, quite possibly indeed his mate of a few months earlier in the season. Such considerations were less than nothing to Mustela, whose ferocious spirit knew neither gallantry, chivalry, nor mercy. With what seemed a single flashing leap, he was upon her, or almost, for the slim female was no longer there. She had bounded away as lightly and instantaneously as if blown by the wind of his coming. She knew Mistela, and she knew it would be death to stay and do battle for her kill. Spitting with rage and fear, she fled from the spot, terrified lest he would come pursue her and find the nest where her 6 precious kittens were concealed. But Mistela was too hungry to be interested just to be interested, just in mere slaughter for its own sake. He was feeling serious and practical. The grouse was a full grown cock, plump and juicy, and when Mistela had devoured it, his appetite was sated, but not so his bloodlust. After a hasty toilet, he set out again, looking for something to kill. Crossing the belt of rocky ground, he emerged upon a flat tract of treeless barren covered with a dense growth of blueberry bushes about a foot in height. The bushes at this season were loaded with ripe fruit of a bright blue color, and squatting among them was a big black bear, enjoying the banquet at his ease. Gathering the berries together wholesale with his great furry paws, he was cramming them into his mouth greedily, with little grunts and gurgles of delight, and the juicy fragments which his snout and jaws were smeared gave his formidable face an absurdly childish look. To Mastella, when that insolent little animal flashed before him, he vouchsafed no more than a glance of good natured contempt. For the rank and stringy flesh of a pine marten he had no use at any time of the year, at least of all in the season when the blueberries were ripe. Mastella, however, was too discreet to pass within reach of one of those huge but nimble paws, lest the happy bear should grow playful under the stimulus of the blueberry juice. He turned aside to a judicious distance, and there, sitting up on his hindquarters like a rabbit, he proceeded to nibble, rather super, superciliously, a few of the choicest berries. He was not enthusiastic over vegetable food, but just as a cat will now and then eat grass, he liked at times a little corrective to his unvarying diet of flesh. Having soon had enough of the blueberry patch, Mastella left it to the bear and turned back toward the deep of the forest, where he felt most at home. He went stealthily, following up the wind in order that his scent might not give warning of his approach. It was getting near sunset by this time, and floods of pinky gold, washing across the open barrens, poured in along the ancient corridors of the forest, touching the somber trunks with stains of tenderest rose. In this glowing color, Mastella, with his ruddy fur, moved almost invisible, and so moving, he came plump upon a big buck rabbit squatting half asleep in the center of a clump of pale green fern. The rabbit hounded straight into the air, his big childish eyes popping from his head with horror. Mastella's leap was equally instantaneous, and it was un- unerring. He struck his victim in midair, with his fangs met deep in the rabbit's throat. With a scream, the rabbit fell backwards and came down with a muffled thump upon the ferns, with Mastella on top of him. There was a brief thrashing struggle, and then Mastella, with his forepaws upon the breast of his still quivering prey, several times larger and heavier than himself, lifted his blood-stained face and stared about him savagely, as if defying all the other prowlers of the forest to come and try to rob him of his prize. Having eaten his fill, Miss Stella dragged the remnants of the carcass under a thick bush, defilled it so as to make it distasteful to other eaters of flesh, and scratched a lot of dead leaves and twigs over it till it was effectually hidden. As game was abundant at this season, and as he always preferred a fresh kill, he was not likely to want any more of that victim. But he hated the thought of any rival getting a profit from his prowess. Mastella now turned his steps homeward, traveling more lazily, but with eyes, nose, and ears ever on the alert for fresh quarry. Though his appetite was sated for some hours, he was as eager as ever for the hunt, for the fierce joy of the killing, and the haste and the taste of the hot blood. But the unseen powers of the wilderness, ironic and impartial, decided just then that it was time for Mastella to be hunted in his turn. If there was one creature above all others who could strike the fear of death into Mistella's merciless soul, it was his great cousin, the ferocious and implacable fisher. Of twice his weight and thrice his strength, and his full peer in swiftness and cunning, the fisher, the fisher was Mistella's nightmare, from whom there was no escape unless in the depths of some hole too narrow for the fisher's powerful shoulders to get into. And at this moment, there was the fisher's grinning, black muzzled mask crouched in the path before him, eyeing him with a sneer of certain triumph. Mistella's heart jumped into his throat as he flashed about and fled for his life. Straight away, alas, from his safe hole in the, in the treetop, and with the lightning dart of a striking rattler, the fisher was after him. Mistella had a start of perhaps 20 paces, and for a time he held his own. He dared no tricks, lest he should lose ground, for he knew his foe was as swift and as cunning as himself. But he knew himself stronger and more enduring than most of his tribe, and therefore he put his hope, for the most part, in his endurance. Moreover, there was always a chance that he might come upon some hole or crevice too narrow for his pursuer. Indeed, to a tough and indomitable spirit like Mistella's, until his enemy fangs should, to, should finally lock themselves in his throat, there should always seem to be a chance. One could never know which way the freakish fates of the wilderness would cast their favor. On and on he raced, therefore, tearing up or clown the long, sloping trunks of ancient windfalls, twisting like a golden snake through tangled thickets, springing in great airy leaps from trunk to rock, from rock to overhanging branch, in silence, and ever at his heels followed the relentless, grinning shape of his pursuer, gaining a little in the long leaps, but losing a little in the denser thickets, and so just about keeping his distance. For all Mustella's endurance, the end of that race, in all probability, would have been for him but one swift, screeching fight, and then the dark. But at this juncture, the fates woke up, peered ironically through the grey and ancient mosses of their hair, and remembered some grudge against the fisher. A moment later, Mistella, just launching himself on a desperate leap, beheld in his path a huge hornet's nest suspended from a branch near the ground. Well he knew and respected that terrible insect, the great black hornet with the cream white stripes about his body. But it was too late to turn aside. He crashed against the grey, papery spear, tearing it from its cables, and flashed on, with half a dozen white hot stings in his hindquarters, prodding him to a fresh burst of speed. Swerving slightly, he dashed through a dense thicket of juniper scrub, hoping not only to scrape his fiery tormentors off, but at the same time to gain a little on his big pursuer. The fisher was at this stage not more than a dozen paces in the rear. He arrived, to his undoing, just as the outraged hornets poured out in a furiously humming swarm from their overturned nest. It was clear enough to them that the fisher was their assailant. assailant. With deadly unanimity, they pounced upon him. With a startled screech, the fisher bounced aside and plunged for shelter. But he was too late. The great hornets were all over him. His ears and nostrils were black with them. His long fur was full of them. And his eyes, shut tight, were already a flaming anguish with the corroding poison of their stings. Frantically, he burrowed his face down in the moss and threw into the moist earth, and madly he clawed at his ears, crushing scores of his tormentors. But he could not crush out the venom which their long stings had injected. Finding it hopeless to free himself from their swarms, he tore madly through the underbush, but blindly crashing into trunks and rocks, heedless of everything but the fiery torture which enveloped him. Gradually the hornets fell away from him as he went, knowing that their vengeance was accomplished. At last, groping his way blindly into a crevice between two rocks, he thrust his head down into the moss, and there, a few days later, his swollen body was found by a foraging lynx. The lynx was hungry, but she only sniffed at the carcass and turned away with a growl of disappointment and suspicion. The carcass was too full of poison, even for her, not to discriminating palate. Miss Stella, meanwhile, was having the best and sharpest of reasons for not delaying in his flight, knew nothing of the fate of his pursuer. He only became aware, after some minutes, that he was no longer pursued. Incredulous at first, he at length came to the conclusion that the fisher had been discouraged by his superior speed and endurance. His heart, though still pounding unduly, swelled with triumph. By way of precaution, he made a long detour to come back to his nest, pounced upon and devoured a couple of plump deer mice on the way, ran up his tree and slipped comfortably into his hole, and curled up to sleep with the feeling of a day well spent. He had had full. He had robbed his fellows successfully. He had drunk the blood of his victims. He had outwitted or eluded his enemies. As for his friends, he had none, a fact to which Miss Stella of the Lone Hand was of no concern whatever. Now, as the summer waned and the first keen touch of autumn set the wilderness aflame with the scarlet of maple and sumach, the pale gold of poplar and birch, Miss Stella, for all his abounding health and prosperous hunting, grew restless with, with a discontent which he could not understand. Of the coming winter he had no dread. He had passed through several winters, faring well, when other prowlers, less daring and expert, had starved, and finding that deep nest of his in the old tree a snug refuge from the fiercest storms. But now he knew not why the nest grew irksome to him, and his familiar hunting grounds distasteful. Even the eager hunt and the triumphant kill itself had lost their zest. He forgot to kill except when he was hungry, A strange fever was in his blood, a lust for wandering. And so, one wistful, softly glowing day of Indian summer, when the violet light that bathed the forest was full of mystery and allurement, he set off on a journey. He had no thought of why he was going or whither, nor was he conscious of any haste. When hungry, he stopped to hunt and kill and feed. But he no longer cared to conceal the remnants of his kills, for he dimly realized that he would not be returning. If running waters crossed his path, he swam them. If broad lakes intervened, he skirted them. From time to time he became aware that others of his kind were moving with him, but each one furtive, silent, solitary, self sufficing, like himself. He heeded them not, nor they him, but all, impelled by one urge, which could be blindly obeyed, kept drifting onward toward the west and north. At length, when the first snows began, Mistela stopped in a forest not greatly different from that which he had left, but ever wilder, denser, more unvisited by the foot of man. And here, the wanderlust having suddenly left his blood, he found himself a new hole, lined warm with moss and dry grasses, and resumed his hunting with all the ancient zest. Back in Mistella's old hunting grounds, a lonely trapper, finding no more golden sable in his snares, but only mink and lynx and fox, grumbled regretfully. The Martin have quit. We'll see no more of him round these parts for another 10 years. But he had no notion why they had quit, nor anyone had, nor had anyone else, not even Mistela himself.